Good day. My name is John Corstein, and I am the Director Emeritus of the USS Monitor Center at the Mariners Museum and Park in Newport News, Virginia. And these days, what we're doing is trying to bring our history that's within our museum out to you using these virtual formats. So, at the end of the program, you're very welcome to ask me any questions that you wish to. You can also, excuse me, you can also suggest any type of other programming that you might want me to do, like topics and what have you. And so I'm scheduled for 6 months, but I'll fit whatever you'd like in. And you can go to the museum's website to see the blog about this program and also my blogs for all the previous programs. So there's history lessons everywhere. But today we're going to talk about something really great, and it is the capture of the St. Nicholas. And on June 28, 1862, the Union's first charge of piracy during the Civil War would be in the Potomac River with the capture of the passenger steamer St. Nicholas. Now, actually, Captain George Hollins, this is George Hollins. He was born in Baltimore in 1799. He was a hero of the War of 1812. He served on the USS Erie, but then he served on the USF President with Stephen Decatur. And of course, they were captured in this battle during a snowstorm in Long Island Sound as the president was trying to escape. So while fighting during the Second Barbary Coast War with Stephen Decatur, they actually board the ship of this notorious pirate, Ras Hamadou, and Hamadou is killed, and he has this beautiful bejeweled scimitar, which you can see in this image of a statue of him. And he's an Algerian corsair, as they would call him, or pirate. And so Decatur picks that sword up and the scabbard and gives it to Hollins for Hollins' heroic work on that battle. Wow. So he'll go on, be in command of Sackett's Harbor Navy Yard. He'll also be in command of the USS Susquehanna. And the Susquehanna is, of course, a paddle wheel steamer built under the direction of Commodore Matthew Perry. But he's in the Mediterranean Sea. The war breaks out, so he brings his ship back. They want to arrest him. He somehow gets down to Baltimore, and then he goes to Richmond. Now, while in Richmond, he is working with the Secretary of the Navy, Stephen Russell Mallory. Now, entering also in this picture is probably the more flamboyant of the two, although I got to tell you, Hollins is one fighter. He's determined. He's destined to do great things in the early part of the Civil War. But this other man I need to talk about is originally known as Richard Thomas Jr., and he was born on October 27, 1833, at his family's plantation known as Mattaponi. So it's on the Patuxent River in southern Maryland. His father was the former Speaker of the House of Delegates for the state of Maryland. His uncle was James Thomas, was actually governor of Maryland. So you can just see very great connections. In fact, it was said of him that he was most spirited and daring, a hard-drinking young blade, an excellent sailor, marksman, and skilled horseman. Richard Thomas Jr. was the elite of the elite gentry in the mid-19th century Maryland. Now, he went to Charlotte Hall Military Academy. Then he also went to Oxford Academy. Then he went to West Point. And, after 1 year, he left West Point. He was a little too spirited, I guess, got a lot of demerits. And so he would then go out to California. He surveyed government lands. And then the spirit of adventure just took hold of him. And he went to China during the Taiping Rebellion, and also what's known as the Second Opium War. And he fought pirates with the ever victorious army led by Chinese Gordon, this very famous British officer. He then became really enthralled with Giuseppe Garibaldi and his work with the Hungarian War of Independence from Brazil. And so he then is going to actually go to, now right at this time, this is 1859, he's going to go to Italy because France is allied with the Kingdom of Sardinia, and they are trying to push the Austro-Hungarian army out of Italy so that Italy could be unified and as one nation state. And so he joins the Imperial French Zouaves, and this is a really elite unit. You can see the picture. This is actually the Zouaves in Crimea, but you got the idea, the baggy pants, the cap, and they were light infantry. And this actually these Zouaves come from when France conquers Algeria, and they use natives there who were dressed in this fascist troops to defeat the loyalists in Algeria. The French say, these guys are so great, it must be their uniform. And so in truth, it was not their uniform, it's just their esprit de corps, perhaps brought on by the uniform. And so what's going to happen is he is going to serve. Actually, he's there. He's a witness when King Victor Emmanuel has his triumphant entry into Naples. While serving with the Imperial Zouaves, Richard Thomas fell in love with a French lady who later died in his arms. He mourned her forevermore, and even changing his name in her honor to Richard Thomas Zorona. And he comes back to Maryland, and this is 1861. He's filled with this romantic notion that he wanted to pass into reality for his service for the Confederacy. As he wrote his cousin, to avoid the fatigue of a private's life, which I admit I am little prepared for, I wrote for information as to the means necessary to purchase a commission. If Maryland raises a navy, and will not someone be willing to fit out a small, strong, swift screw propeller vessel carrying 1 or 2 10 or 11-inch guns? As for men, I think I could get 150 a day. Wow. So Zorana sets up a camp of instruction near the mouth of the Cone River. That is in Virginia, right across from, of course, St. Mary's County, Maryland, where Richard Thomas Zorana is from. And so as a result of that, he gets this concept because he sees all these Union gunboats going up and down the river, because actually the Confederates had fortified the lower part of the river with, especially at Matthias Point, which will be where they are blockading Washington. So Washington doesn't have any riverine access at this time. So basically, he decides he wants to capture the Pawnee by some trick, and he then goes to Richmond and meets with Governor John Letcher. And it is said that when he arrived, he was dressed in the height of fashion, fragile in form, with sharp, irregular features, sharp indentations in his cheeks, blue eyes. There was a deep-seated melancholy about the man. Oh my gosh. So this is the Pawnee, as you can see, and this is the ship that he wants to capture. The Pawnee is recently built at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, and it is a 10-gun gunboat. So it's a pretty powerful ship and would control much of the Potomac if the Confederates were able to capture it. Now, so he meets with the Letcher, and he tells him, well, I want to capture by ruse a steamer then come alongside the Pawnee and then board them with my men, because this camp of instruction, he is raising a company of zouaves. And so I have to tell you that he sells Letcher on the idea. Letcher then sends him to Matthew Fontaine Maury and promotes Zorana to lieutenant colonel, gives him $1,000 draft, and he also meets with Hollins. And so as a result of that, Hollins buys into the plan, and actually he and several other Confederate naval officers will decide to take part in this daring plan. The idea is that they are going to actually capture a steamer known as the St. Nicholas. And the St. Nicholas is part of from a Baltimore to Washington steam line that would stop at various points along the bay and up the Potomac, and then go to Washington, then turn around and come back. So, you know, this is the typical way of travel during this time, because if you live in southern Maryland, there are no railroads there. You live in the northern neck of Virginia, no railroads. So riverine passengers are really important. Now, I got to tell you that the Pawnee was flagship for what is known as the Potomac Squadron, which included two other steamers, one known as the Thomas Freeborn and the other known as the Reliance. And I have to tell you, I don't want to talk about that yet. I want to tell you that these steamers are going to be former ferry boats that the Federals will turn into gunboats, because they're heavy enough to carry guns. So basically, Zorana comes up with this idea that he is going to dress as a French lady, right? And so that is actually Zorana right there. And so what's going to happen is that he goes up to Baltimore, he buys a bunch of weapons, puts them in 3 huge trunks, and then he gets on the St. Nicholas, and as he arrives, oh my gosh, everyone is just amazed. He has 15 volunteers, including George Alexander and another man known as George Watts. In fact, when Watts goes to meet Zorana, he felt really that this was going to be a desperate mission. However, he did not think that person organizing Zorana is going to be worth it, because he calls him, I was mildly disappointed with the colonel. He looked like one of those slick floor walkers in a department store. I think that the other men felt the same as I did, but soon we found we were all fooled. Believe me, sir, that man had the quickest brain I ever came across, and his eyes were just as quick. Eyes? Why? When that man looked at you, they went right through you. It didn't take us long to learn who was the boss around here. So he brings together 16 followers, and he tells them all to dress as different type of people, whether as a lawyer, a workman, and so forth, and that they would all get on the St. Nicholas different times, and then at the appointed moment, he would bring them all together. So on the early evening of June 28th, 1861, about 60 passengers had already booked their passage on the St. Nicholas when the ship was about to leave. A very stylishly dressed young lady, speaking only broken English with a thick French accent, her heavily bearded brother, George Alexander, helped translate her wishes. Her name was Madame Leforce, and she had several heavy trunks with her. Of course, they're containing armament, but she says she's going to Washington to start a millinery business. So, I mean, she seems to be like the height of fashion, the beauty, and so they, are entrapped by her charm. So they give her one of the major staterooms, and they carry her trunks in and everything. When the steamer departed Baltimore, she emerges from her stateroom and flirts shamelessly with most attractive males amongst the passengers and the ship's officers. The commander of the St. Nicholas, Captain Jacob Kerwin, who was he prided himself with his knowledge of French. And so what he's going to do is he gets into a conversation. According to George Alexander, she proved herself quite a French native with a stream of coquettish language that overwhelmed him. Fluent French gushed from her lips. She radiated charm. A veil covered her eyes and cheeks, but not her reddened lips. She tossed her fan about, cocked her head at such an angle and toward any gentleman who occupied her attention at the moment. She meandered from salon to dance hall, flirting as she went with all the ship's officers. Kerwin says, I didn't like the appearance of that French woman at all. She sat right next to me at dinner and so close that our legs touched. I thought she looked mighty queer. That young woman behaved so scandalously that all the other women on the boat were in a terrible state. The people were just mesmerized by her. This shows that she drops her handkerchief, and this passenger picks up the handkerchief with heavily scented, and it's, oh my gosh. When they reach Point Lookout, a group of people with an elderly gentleman with a wig and a partially fake beard and a cane gets on the St. Nicholas. St. Nicholas then turns into the Potomac River. Now, at that time, George Watts had noted some of the other volunteers, but he hadn't seen the colonel. But what worried me most, he said, I couldn't find the colonel or anyone who looked like him. I could see the failure of the whole expedition, and I could also see myself behind bars in Fort McHenry. The picture didn't look too good to me. I was on deck wondering where it's all going to end and whether I'd be hung as a rebel spy when someone touched me on the arm. I whirled about like someone had stuck a knife in me and saw Alexander. He grinned all the way that he had scared me and said, you're wanted in the second cabin. I hurried below and nearly had a fit when I found all our boys gathered around that frisky French lady. She looked at me and she came in. Lord, I knew those eyes in a minute. It was the colonel. He shed his bonnet, wig, and dress and stepped forward in a brilliant new zouave uniform. The men quickly opened the trunks, found them loaded with weapons. They buckled them on and headed to the main deck. The old man with the cane is already on the main deck, interested in how the ship is going. He's at the pilot house, and he slipped off his wig, and he was Captain George Hollins. He takes over command of the St. Nicholas as Sylvana's men, make all the officers and the crew do their bidding, and they go over to the Cone River, pick up 30 Tennessee infantrymen so that they have a larger force, because now is the time they really want to take advantage of the situation. Now, this is a picture of James Harmon Ward. He is commander of the Potomac Squadron. And the day before the St. Nicholas is now captured, this man will take his squadron. Now, the Pawnee had to go back up to the Washington Navy Yard for repair, so he just has the St. Thomas or Thomas Freeborn and the Reliance with him. So they land some troops trying to take this battery commanded by Daniel Ruggles, who later becomes a great hero of the Battle of Shiloh. And anyway, he's an artillerist, a West Point graduate, and the battery at Matthias Point is shelling the Federal troops as well as the ships. So the second landing fails, and as a result of that, now look at this picture here. You can see this 32-pounder shell gun, and it looks like someone is sighting it. Well, let me tell you, Ward will actually, as the troops are leaving, that's Matthias Point, there's the Thomas Freeborn, next to it is the Reliance. Now, he aims the gun to cover the retreat, and I gotta tell you what happens is that he's aiming that gun just like in this picture here, right? Just imagine that's Ward, and a sharpshooter from the shore shoots him, and he's mortally wounded, dies a few hours later. The men are all in mourning. The break off action, the Thomas Freeborn and the Reliance then go up to Washington, D.C., where Ward just so happened to be a friend of Abraham Lincoln. So they give him a large funeral. He's the first U.S. naval officer killed during the war. So this is pretty major stuff. So, so what's going to happen now is the St. Nicholas looks around trying to find these warships, and they're unable to do so. So what happens is that they realize that the St. Nicholas is due in Washington at any time. So instead, they decide to go down into the Chesapeake Bay. And they have no cannon. They just have riflemen and those types of things. However, they chanced upon a large brig known as the Monticello, loaded with 35,000 bags of coffee, headed from Brazil to Baltimore. They send that up to Fredericksburg under a prize crew. 1 hour later, the St. Nicholas will come across the schooner Mary Pierce, going from Boston to Baltimore with a load of ice. Ice is really critical stuff back then. And so Lieutenant Robert Dabney Minor, who's a real hero later in the war, will actually take that ship and sail it up to Fredericksburg. And now the St. Nicholas is running low on coal. So they just happen to chance upon a ship, a coaling schooner known as the Margaret. And they capture it, they recoal the St. Nicholas, then they tow the Margaret up to Fredericksburg. Everyone at Fredericksburg is overjoyed because this is a great Confederate victory, a ruse of the highest order. Hollins is named a flag officer and is sent to New Orleans. He later fights at the Battle of the Passes, which is a blog and a story I told some time ago. And so when they're in Fredericksburg, it is amazing. A ball was given in their honor, and actually then they moved to Richmond, where even more balls were held, especially at the Spotswood Hotel. Now, George Watts says, Zorana presented a dramatic illusion of oriental splendor, blue pantaloons, embroidered vest, white gaiters, crimson cloth with gold tassel, and a light, beautifully crafted sword. One British observer said when he saw Zorana in the Spotswood Hotel, says, a strange man he was as he walked into the dining room in his zouave costume and red cap on his closely shaved head. The tassel hung low down on his shoulders, and his manner was silent, reserved, and gloomy. Poor man. Well, Zorana is itching to get back into action. So now he's considered a great hero, but he decides he wants to do, the French lady needs to do another exploit. And so he's going to try and take over the steamer Mary Washington. Now, I forgot to tell you all that the pastors, the crew, and everyone on the St. Nicholas are dropped off at shore, and it just so happens that the Mary Washington is a ship that has a similar cruise from Washington to Baltimore. They pick up those people, and as they near Baltimore, they make one stop, and on board comes the French lady, Madame Laforce. Well, Kerwin recognizes him, tells the captain. They alert Fort McHenry, and instead of steaming into Baltimore, they actually will stop at the dock at Fort McHenry. And, they see Zorana on the dock. This is July 9th, 1861. But where was he? Well, he actually, right? Some other ladies, were very fond of Zorana, and they put her in crammed him in a wardrobe, believe it or not. He's slight. He's about 5'5", kind of like Mosby, probably around 120 pounds. So they hide him, but one person gives him up. And so they pull him out of there and they put him in Fort McHenry in chains, solitary confinement. And they decide they want to hang Colonel Zavarona. Many people try to intercede. They say, well, he's an officer in the Confederate Army. Well, he was dressed as a woman. So, he's a spy, he's a pirate. And so instead of hanging him at Fort McHenry, they send him up to Fort Lafayette in New York Harbor. He suffered greatly confinement there. His mother actually visits him and says she recognized her son. He tried to escape a couple of times from Fort Lafayette, but failed. And so what he does is he will actually be released, exchanged, as we say, in April of 1863. As such, he will actually return to Maryland. He has a severe nervous condition now, and then he goes to Europe to regain his health. He had pledged not to serve in the Confederate service again. And so as a result of that, he will go to Europe to some spas. His family's very wealthy. He makes some mistakes in investments, and so he has to come back to Maryland a broken man. He has to live with his brother, James William Thomas, and at his estate known as Great Falls, near Chaptigo, Maryland. And there, Zavarona will die on March 17, 1875. Former Governor John Letcher of Virginia wrote a memorial in the colonel's honor. Colonel Zavarona was a most extraordinary man. If any man had ever lived of whom it must be said he was insensible to fear, Zavarona was undoubtedly that man. He sought the most hazardous undertakings and fearlessly exposed himself to the most formidable dangers. And yet, modesty, candor, sincerity were predominant traits in his character. He was a true and tried citizen, a patriot, and a gallant soldier. He was somewhat eccentric, but his eccentricities did not render him disagreeable. On the contrary, tended to inspire regard for and excite interest in him. And so that's the story of the capture of the St. Thomas. Zavarona will actually, as I said, die March 17, 1870. So he never wrote anything as a result of his confinement during the early part of the Civil War. So Zavarona was a type of person that was just very flashy, but he was a flash in the pan when it comes to overall Confederate history or Civil War history. Nevertheless, this is a nice little story just to see how cavalier people were at the very beginning of the war. Things will turn in a much different way as we come to serious fighting, such as the Battle of First Manassas, which will take place in July. So anyway, I want to thank you all for watching today, and I hope you enjoyed the program. I will tell y'all that once again, you can contact me. That's John Letcher, by the way. You can send me an email. My email address is up on the slide. You can send me an email with any other questions you might have, any suggestions for other programs. And I should also say that you can go to the Mariners Museum website where you can read my blogs. I'm writing about 3 blogs a month for the museum. And so that we, the Mariners Museum, can share this great content that we have. And this content is, you don't always have to go into the physical museum to find enjoyment with the stories of the sea, the tales of the Civil War. I mean, there's just so much history that is throughout, the world when you recognize that man is connected in every way to the waterways of the world.
This question is, how prevalent was piracy on the North American shores in the Civil War?
Well, George Beale Yates is another one that had his Confederate Volunteer Coast Guard. They operated out of Matthews County, Mojack Bay, and they actually used log canoes. And I think you all must know log canoe, beautiful lines, has a sail, and that one was called the Swan, which was the favorite one used by George Beale Yates. And he actually went and destroyed the lenses of the Cape Charles Lighthouse. He actually captured some contrabands off of at the mouth of the Back River that was now known as Factory Point. However, he actually one time he knew he was being chased, and so they actually Henry Halleck came down to Fort Monroe, and they organized an expedition to try and capture Yates. And so what they did is they sunk their log canoes, right, but filling with sand, and then they went into this one person's house and they were eating biscuits and gravy when the Yankees showed up. And so as the Federals came in the front door, out the back door they went, and the only disappointment they had was that they hadn't finished their biscuits and gravy. Yates would later be captured on Lake Michigan, trying to capture a steamer so he could wreak havoc, and he will then be hanged as a pirate. He's the only one to be hanged as a pirate. Now, some people say Raphael Semmes, John Newland Maffitt were all pirates. However, they were commerce raiders, officially Confederate ships. So I think really the only two real pirates we can think about would be Zorana and Yates. And Yates the only one that got hanged. They wanted to hang Zorana very badly, so they didn't get to. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you. I hope you enjoyed that presentation. Please do like the program. It's the mission of the Mariners Museum in this brave new world to strive to share our content in as many ways as we can. And your participation in these programs are outstanding, and I want to really strive to tailor make them for what you want to learn about. And so I already have gotten some feedback, and I have changed some of my future programs to make them even more exciting. And I'm excited just about doing it. So next week's program, which is about the founding of Newport News, you're going to have to, when you see the post that comes up, the flyer that comes up, which I'll send out, Mariners will send it out. I'll send it out. You need to click and sign into the program so that you can be part of the audience. It's a good way for us to track these programs. And then you'll realize that the Mariners Museum has its own YouTube channel where we'll archive like this story and all the other ones I've been giving. Since I think we started doing this in April. I mean, it's kind of like one day I was at the museum giving lectures. Next day I'm here doing Zoom lectures. So it really works. And I thank you all for your participation. So until later then, just always remember to sink before you surrender. Thank you.